He also said there are some mistakes that, are unrecoverable. The first aide he had was fired. But he also said there are some mistakes that are learning mistakes. And at the end of a hard day when I might have made a mistake or in the middle of a mistake, he'd look over to me and laugh and say, I'm not going to fire you today. And I'd say, no, thank you, Admiral. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. I'm T.D. Smyers, and this is No Clichés. Hello and welcome to No Clichés, companion podcast to my coaching, consulting, and leadership writing at A Bold Leader. I'm T.D. Smyers, and I've been in leadership my whole life, from taking point in small teams to command of military troops to multiple roles as a CEO. And if this life in leadership has taught me anything, it's that leading is more art than science. I call this No Clichés because we'll go well beyond the basics here, leaving behind the LinkedIn infographics to dive headfirst into some of the toughest situations a leader can face. Through stories and interviews, you'll get a behind-the-scenes look at leadership truths that always apply, no matter what industry or sector you're in. This is a no-holds-barred leadership conversation, so strap in. Few people manage to navigate as many worlds and lead in all of them as my lifelong friend Mark Fava. He's a world-renowned expert in aviation law, a retired senior officer in the U.S. Naval Reserve, and a former elected official who brought integrity and discipline to every role he's ever served in. Now he's sharing the wisdom he's gathered from the cockpit, the courtroom, and the quarterdeck in his new book, Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom and Sea Stories for Leaders. It's a masterclass in leadership you'll both apply and enjoy. Today on No Clichés, we sit with Mark Fava to explore what true command and humility look like in action. Let's go in studio with Mark Fava now. And welcome, Mark Fava, to No Clichés. Man, it's good to be talking to you this morning.
TD, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. Thanks for that kind introduction.
Hey, man, we go way back, and it's pretty cool. Here we are. We're actually recording this in the beginning of October, and this is the Navy's birth month thing. So I learned that from my stepdaughter. It's like, yeah, you don't celebrate just the birthday. It's the whole month.
That's right. Birth month 25, 250.
Yeah, quarter of a millennium old here at the U.S. Navy. So it's pretty cool to be talking to my old Navy bud, Mark, on this day and just kind of reflecting back, getting ready for this conversation. I was thinking about all the things that I say struggle through because leadership is kind of tough, It's got its highs and lows and a lot of the things we experienced together and just getting to know each other in Jacksonville, Florida, in what may arguably have been the heyday of maritime patrol aviation. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were blessed to fly around the world in P-3s chasing Soviet subs in the height of the Cold War. No more fun mission that really tested our leadership at a very young age. And then both of us were just very, very fortunate to emerge as commanding officers of squadrons, me in line right behind you. So, boy, what a wonderful way to start and for me to close to finish a Navy career. We went on for a couple more tours after that. But, boy, that was surely the pinnacle of it all, wasn't it?
Yeah. Squadron command is tough to, I say beat, but I mean, there are other things, beyond that, obviously, the Navy has for you to do. But that time in the squadron was probably the last time you really got to experience that camaraderie of, hanging out in the fly trap, the brass nut, after missions with your crew and just experiencing that camaraderie of a bunch of, like you said, really young knuckleheads, bumming around the world in multi-billion-dollar aircraft and flight suits.
Right. I mean, when I think about it now, and the places we went, the things we did, and the ages that we were at the time, it's pretty fascinating that we were entrusted with that much responsibility and that much authority.
Yeah, I think about it a lot, and we'll touch on that when we talk about your book. Obviously, that's coming up because you really captured so much in that book. And as we talk about it, we'll discuss what some of the kind of simple but not easy leadership behaviors it brings forward that are so important to set a foundation for leadership. But the stuff that we learned, and before you went on the tour that the book is centered around, you were operational maritime patrol guy. You and I were around the same time period going through our initial squadrons and learning that stuff. And I think about the amount of accountability and authority we had as 22, 23, 24-year-old officers running crews. It's pretty mind-boggling now that we're older than that, looking
Yeah.
back at people that are that young today.
Yeah, we both have we both have daughters, and we kid about that a lot, being hashtag girl dads. But when you think that my middle daughter is now 20 something, and I think, gosh, that was the age we were when we were flying around the world with a crew of 12. And that was, shoot, we were old. I mean, there were the enlisted operators in the back of the plane who are experts in tracking the submarines based on the acoustic profiles, could have been younger than us. So it was really, really phenomenal experience.
Yeah, it was. I tell those stories a lot, and a lot of people look at me like, you've got to be making this up, man.
Yeah.
Like, you guys actually did that stuff. I'm like, yeah, we did. And of course, the plane's retired now, and P3 Orion is gone to pasture and made way for the P8A Poseidon. And so some of the same squadrons, including our old squadron, flying the P8A. You've had an opportunity to see that bird, haven't you?
Beautiful plane. I'm a little bit biased because it's manufactured by my current employer. At the same time, it's hard to say goodbye to the P3 because it was, as you said, just a dependable workhorse that took us all over the place and brought us back safely. But I'll tell you, the people that are flying the P8 really love it. I mean, same mission, but a lot more capability. And gosh, get this, a real head and a refueling probe, which is really scary.
Yeah, that's the one thing we hope they would never bring to the P3.
Yeah. Last thing you want on a 12-hour mission is a tanker pulling up and saying, we're going to give you some more gas. Please go away.
You get to stay out here longer. But hey, ASW, man, that's a strategic mission there. That game is a long-term game. So, well, God bless those folks that are working out in that field now. And I look back at our careers, and we kind of took this fork in the road, right? We were active duty around the same time. And then you actually got off active duty and began a second career as an attorney. And then you maintained drilling with the U.S. Navy and the Naval Reserve. And man, I was privileged to come and work with you and others like you as what was called a TAR officer. The Training and Administration of the Reserve was the acronym. So it was TAR. And working with you folks, I just developed a real respect for the people that could juggle three things. And you write about this in your book, but you lived it in reality. So talk a little bit about the necessity to prioritize and what those three elements of your life are that you had to get into balance.
Yeah. Way back in 91, after I finished my tour as the Admiral's aide, I did go back to law school. And it was a huge decision, right? Because one, there was a little bit of a stigma back then. Oh, you're quote unquote leaving the Navy when in fact you were going into the reserves, but it still wasn't, you remember, it wasn't looked upon with favor. At the same time, your position might not have been because we were incredibly capable, but we were then labeled reservists. But the truth of the matter was, it was the best decision I ever made. One, because I got to meet people like you, and two, because like you said, it taught me how to manage multiple things at once and try not to drop any balls. And after doing that for 24 years, I sort of came to the conclusion, actually, after the first couple of years, like you said, that I could typically do three things fairly well. Anything more than that, and it got a little bit dicey.
Just like juggling.
Yeah. Those three things were family, number one. Number two, my civilian employment. And number three, the reserve job. And at any given time, one of those is at the top of what I call the rotating life triangle or the reserve triangle. And the other two, you're just doing your best to hold at bay. And that triangle can rotate pretty quickly depending on the circumstances, which, you and I had during that reserve career. Something happened down in Jacksonville. Boy, it flipped the switch pretty quickly, and I needed to focus on being there. At the same time, I knew we had trusted officers like you who were holding down the fort. So it was just a wonderful paradigm that worked very well back then and continues to work very well this day.
Yeah, I'd like to turn the clock back a little bit to that time. And that was a watershed time in obviously both of our careers, as we just talked about squadron command. And I remember you specifically, I think you still have the Navy record for amount of time spent as an XO because you were an XO when I got named to come to the squadron to ultimately be the commanding officer, and I had to serve as XO first. So you went from XO to XXO. Oh, wait. XO, XO, XXO, PXO again, XO, and then obviously squadron commanding officer.
Yeah.
When
And that
we
was
had our
wonderful because remember, when you finish as a reservist, when you finish squadron command, you're done, right? You leave the platform. You're no longer in an aviation billets. Although typically people would be upset and mad. You got to be kidding me! You're delaying my command tour. Every time I got bumped back, I was like, "Oh, this is great! Another year in the squadron. I got a license for 2 or 3 more years, and to serve with you and our good friend Brian Quigley."
Yeah.
And just continue to learn. And then the other thing we were able to do is we were able to agree on some type of strategic longevity, right? A partnership and a command mission that we all agreed that we would carry through for, 5 or 6 years during our tenure, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm amazed when I look back now and see the squadron coins, and they still reflect the motto that we had created during that command triad when it was Quiggs and me and you, and then brought Guy in who would serve as your XO, Guy Jackson, and aim true, strike true, right?
Yeah,
Allegiance, integrity, mission.
Words that came out of your mouth have stuck in that squadron. And that is so critical when you talk about, legacy, leadership, and strategic vision for the future. I think, most of us at a young age, we're thinking about next month, next year, maybe 2 or 3 years from now. But I think a true leader thinks about, okay, what does this look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, even 100 years from now. And that's really important.
Yeah, and we worked at it. We hoped we'd achieve that, and it's pretty cool to see that they're still using it. It's a good motto, and you had a good point though. Legacy, especially in the Navy, when it's different in the military, right? You're going to leave this job. Succession is a built-in part of the job, and I remember this prayer from the change of command ceremony that I still use as I coach executives who are involved in succession. The prayer said, "Thank you, God, for the wisdom inherent in the change of command ceremony, creating as it does a sense of strength and continuity amidst change." And that really has cemented for me the nature and the necessity of succession.
Yeah. There's absolutely nothing like a change command ceremony, not only in terms of the tradition, but the peaceful transfer of command, which is instantaneous. It serves a purpose, and everybody knows exactly what's going on. And the squadron or the new unit or the aircraft carrier just keeps functioning the next day. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. You had some difficult times when you were XO, my XO, and I mean, you and I worked through a Class A aircraft mishap together for much of my tour.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when you took command, you had some difficulties too. You almost lost a sailor, right, to a off-duty accident. When you're looking back at your time in command at what can be a pretty lonely and thankless job, what strikes you as the thing that was just most difficult about it, and how did you handle that?
Gosh, we often talk about that, the loneliness of command, the loneliness of leadership. And you can recall, TD, back in those days, we were going through this insane thing called active reserve integration. Mm-hmm. It came down from above that not only were we going to support the active duty, we were going to integrate seamlessly into their squadrons, to the fact that our unit members would take their patches off, walk down the hall, and be a member of another squadron, and were told to put on the other squadron's patch. And then they were calling in the active duty to come in and work on weekends. So, although potentially well-intended, it just pissed off everybody. The active duty hated it because they didn't want to come in on weekends. We hated it because we didn't want to march down to their squadron, lose our squadron identity, and work with a bunch of, what we considered to be young and inexperienced knuckleheads.
Yeah.
And I think, that was something that was finally given as an order by the Commodore to me, an active duty person. And after everybody complained about it, and there was a lot of bellyache, and, I finally had to call the squadron together, at least the leadership, and just say, listen, I'll be truthful with you. I don't like this either, but it's an order and we're going to do it. And that's my expectation, that you follow through with it and you stop the bitching and the complaining, because you're not making anybody else happy, right? You're just making it miserable for everybody. And we did it, but that's just a great example of doing something that you really don't want to do, but you think is coming down from above. And that's what we took that oath, right?
Yeah.
To obey the orders of the officers appointed above me. It's just pretty plain and simple.
Well, and you paint a great picture of what we all learn about leadership, right? And one of the definitions is, leadership is about guiding people to do something they don't want to do, but come together and do it
Yeah.
and do it well. And I think you've just articulated, a role that you played as a reserve leader, as a Navy leader, bringing folks to it. And of course, you hit a good point too when you talked about, hanging out with the inexperienced knuckleheads, the active fleet. I was in the active fleet. You were in the active fleet. And we used to look at the reserve as this kind of a mishmash, or a group of long-haired people that never wore the right uniform and ragtags. And then, of course, we wound up commanding a squadron of reservists who were the cream de la cream, right? Jacksonville, Florida was home to the Reserve Air Group, the RAG, the FRS Fleet Replacement Squadron later on. And that was instructors. Everybody that came to our squadrons of reservists had been the best of the best in their fleet squadron and served as an instructor there. So you had all this great talent,
a lot of talent, yeah,
that was electing to leave their time in uniform and go do something else, but continue to fly as you did in the reserve. So it was this eye-watering group of really smart people. Of course, that presented a different kind of challenge, right? Leading a group of Class A hyper performers, right?
Yeah, everybody's the smartest person in the room, including us.
Yeah,
and you had to check yourself sometimes, and you had to check others.
Yeah, and I think we did. I think we got good at that. And of course, your profession was very different. You went into a profession of law, you became an attorney, as you talked about, and you have done some really great things in that business. So we talk a lot about your time in the uniform, and of course, your book is based on some of that time. But as I read through the pages of your book, I kind of see the framing of somebody who's got a career in law as they retell those stories or recast those stories for different lessons. Do you think your dual careers flavored how you have presented the book, even though it was written historically about your time in the Navy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I waited 20 some odd, maybe 30 years to write the book. And the reason was I realized that everything I'd learned in the Navy, especially in this last job and as a commanding officer, was banging around in my head, even as a civilian. So as I was an associate, as I was a federal judicial law clerk, as I then became a partner when I was at operations attorney for Delta Airlines, and now at my current employer, look, leadership, organizational skills, empathy, sympathy as a leader, they're all the same. And that's what sort of was banging around in my head, to your point. And you observed that too, even in your transition from a captain in the Navy to a CEO of a major nonprofit. The concepts are the same and are clearly transferable.
For sure. And since we're kind of talking about the book now, might as well introduce it. We can just kind of get into it, because you have written an incredible book. And I'm holding it in my hand now. It is a skinny book, but it is a book packed with density of wisdom. It's called Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom and Sea Stories for Leaders by one Mark C. Fava. And I happen to have an autographed copy here in my hand. Thank you very much. And was privileged to have taken this book. And initially, Mark, it's because you're my friend. I took it and I said, yeah, I'm going to order it for some of my clients, my coaching clients. And I did. But then as they got into it and gave me feedback and I'm reading into it, it has now become a pivotal part of the leadership library that all of my clients wind up with.
Thank you. Yeah.
So thank you. It's a great read. And, it's funny, as we tee it up and give you a chance to talk about it, I can't help but equate it to, Admiral McCraven's famous speech that everybody's seen out there. It's gone viral, Make Your Bed. Right?
Yeah.
And the reason that your book reminds me of that is it's taken some very foundational and basic skills to being a professional, right? A lot of them equate to leadership, but all of them equate to just being a solid professional. And, McCraven, his whole point was make your bed. Start every day making your bed. You've accomplished something. You've got a great start. And at the end of the day, if you did nothing else, you made your bed, right? And so
right.
I see that reflected in the stories you tell. And the other thing that really strikes me about it is, although they're very basic lessons about professionalism and leadership, they're not academic. They're all backed up by actual stories, some stories of failure, when things didn't go the way you would have preferred them to go professionally. and they're real. They happened. They taught you things that have flavored your professional life and your professional life in the Navy, obviously, but your professional life beyond the Navy. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book like that, Lessons from the Admiral.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. You were, as my daughters say, you were one of the OG supporters. So writing a book is a crazy thing because you start doing it. I've always wanted to do it. And one of the wonderful things about the terribleness of COVID is it gave me the time and the decision to finally put pen to paper and say, look, I'm going to stop watching TV. I'm going to try and do something productive with this time. And that's when I started. So it took me over, it's funny, it's only 148, maybe 150 pages of substance in 18 chapters, but it took me about 2 years to write, to edit, to get a publisher to publish. So it really was a labor of love and on a bucket list item. And I'm happy to say that, it came out the beginning of this year, January 28th, and, it's doing relatively well. The funny thing is, TD is, and it's wonderful because I have all of McRaven's books. His book is written from the perspective of the admiral, the leader telling you what to do. My book is written from the perspective of the young, impressionable aide 30 years ago, trying to learn from that job and learn from the admiral how that person was a legacy leader and how now I impart the stuff I learned from him on to others. That's that concept of legacy leadership. That's really what I wanted to do. The stories that I've told my daughters over the years that I've used to coach with others, I wanted to get into a book. And I'll say one more McRaven thing. The other wonderful thing is now, if you pull my book up on Amazon, it says people who have bought this book and it shows my book have also bought this book and it shows McRaven's book, which is hilarious because it's wonderful, right? It's thousands, hundreds of thousands of copies, and I'm maybe a couple thousand copies. And then it's just such an honor for Amazon's algorithm to tie us together.
It is pretty good company to be in, that's for sure.
Yes, sir.
But it's not like you don't deserve to be there. And I look at the book's chapters, and they're all pretty easy to understand, right? Things like always be on time, getting things done.
Yeah.
But then when you look at chapter 6, right, is know all the details, but then chapter 7 is check the details. So you get into these stories that illustrate a depth to the basic things that a lot of people take for granted. And one of the things I love about, having folks like you on this show and people that I know have led in the arena, you've done these things. You've lived this difficulty. You've lived through these challenges. You've lived through this failure. And instead of moping about it, you've learned from it and you've become better, a better leader because of it. And if your book does anything, it cements in somebody who's trying to find their authentic leadership style. It cements just some basic things to get right. However you exercise it, you got to get these basic things right. And it tells it with just really compelling storytelling. It's the subtitle of the book, of course, is Naval Wisdom and Sea Stories for Leaders. It is an incredibly powerful way to relay this. As you were putting this together, did you have a difficult time at all balancing kind of the lessons from the actual stories, or how did you kind of distill that?
Yeah. My goal all along was to see if I could, because I'm a pretty big reader, mostly of nonfiction books, but the ones that I love the most are the ones where you feel like you're in the room with the reader, right? Where you're taken back to a place and a time. And that was my goal. And the biggest compliment I can get right now is one, someone say, hey, it was a great book. And two, when you started in chapter 1 and when you finished in chapter 18, I felt like I was sitting right next to you when the Admiral was talking to you. And I was like, wow, that's wonderful. And these have been people that aren't my friends. So I don't think
they're actually credible in their praise.
I hope they're just being, that's the difference between an Amazon review and a Goodreads review. Amazon, you get all 5 O's. Goodreads can be a tough crowd. And I'm hovering around a 4.6, but
that's good.
Yeah, it's not bad. But I think to that point, the funny thing was the first thing my editor told me when we really got down to brass tacks of editing is they said just that. They said, Mark, stop writing like a lawyer. And I said, what do you mean? I've been writing like a lawyer for 30 years. They said, no, write like you were thinking back then as a young Navy lieutenant. So that was hard, but that was where the editing was driven, getting right down to exactly what I was thinking, how someone was talking to me, I know there's like 5 cuss words in the book, and I struggle with even putting them in there, but it made it authentic. And I said, you know what? I have to put this in there because that's exactly either A, what I was thinking, or B, what that person said, and which why it made it, funny at the time.
Well, funny and authentic. And
Yeah.
it's funny that I think this is the question that you have to answer most frequently. And at least I'm drawing this from watching your social media post after you've done a book signing or an appearance or a speaking engagement, because the book is called Lessons from the Admiral, and you have to state right away, I'm not the Admiral. Right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, so many people have been very kind to me on social media. And then, the clear litmus test is if, one, if they've read the book, 2, if they've even read the front cover. If they've opened it up and read the front cover, they figure out it wasn't the Admiral. But they'll send me an email or they'll do a post on LinkedIn and they'll say, Admiral, great book. Congratulations. And, it's very difficult, on social media to out them and to say, 1, to be truthful, hey, I'm not the Admiral. And 2, to say, look, how did I dance around on the top of the pen of that pen or needle and say, it's clear to me you haven't read the book, but, thank you so much. But I don't say that. I just say, well, to be honest with you, I wasn't the Admiral. I was the Admiral's aide, and, just to make sure we're clear. But I think that's what makes it unique. Most leadership books from great leaders are written by the leaders preaching. Mine is written from the perspective of a person learning from somebody that then figures out, like you said, at the end of every chapter, how I've applied it during my life.
Yeah, I think there's an unspoken leadership lesson there, and that's a lesson of respect and humility.
Yeah.
You're not writing about, and I mean, I do it. I think most leaders do it. We tend to take the things we experienced and we articulate it, and here's where I failed, or here's where I succeeded, and here's what we learned from it, right? You have taken this and said, here's what I learned from this top level leader during my time there. And you ascribe to that leader ability to forgive mistakes, to give you another chance, to show you a better way to do it, to coach you,
Right.
This is a testimonial. This is a testament to the leadership of the Admiral, your book.
Yeah. And, people, when they read the book, I've had some people say, well, I'm just not going to be a kiss up and I'm not going to always do this and that's not fair. And I said, oh, you know what? You got to be careful because life's not fair, but I'm telling you how it is. And I wasn't a kiss up. He told me, I want you to tell me what I need to hear, not what you think I want to hear, and I took that on to my legal practice. He also said, there are some mistakes that, are unrecoverable. The first aide he had was fired, and I tell the story about that. But he also said there are some mistakes that are learning mistakes. And at the end of a hard day when I might have made a mistake or in the middle of a mistake, he'd look over to me and laugh and say, I'm not going to fire you today. And I'd say, no, thank you, Admiral. Thank you so much.
That's one of the themes in your book, I think, is like, the Admiral told me not to let this happen again. And it didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's what I got that whole point about not being a screamer. We've all seen screamers. And quite honestly, early in my career as a young Navy lieutenant, when things weren't going right on the P3, I might have even succumb to that. But I think he and even the greatest bosses in the world to this day, just like your father, your father, when your dad looks at you and said, I'm just very disappointed in you. That's all it took, man. That's all it took for him. I expected more from you. I'm very disappointed in you. Don't ever let this happen again.
Right.
And you're correct. There's only one response to that. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. There's an aspect of your book too that I think bucks the trend right now. So it's real common on social media, particularly on LinkedIn, to see posts about, why would you bust your hump for an organization that might let you go next week and replace you? And there's this very, what can I get out of the system attitude that's prevalent out there. It's not universal. It's not probably a pandemic right now, but it's out there a lot about kind of individually, what can I get out of this, looking out for number one kind of stuff. And some of the lessons of your book involve things that are very extrinsic to the individual, right? Like know your boss.
Yeah.
It's more about a service-oriented approach to your professionalism and leadership. Is that intentional?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if you want to become a servant leader, you have to have been a servant, right? You have to have been a good executive officer. You have to have been a good assistant, a good chief of staff. You have to have been somebody whose sole purpose is to ensure that the mission of the organization is executed well, not about you, but executed well, or that your boss, his mission and his or her goals are successful. And I think that's the higher calling, right? I mean, it's not easy being number two, but it's critically important. And that's how you learn to become a good leader. And then the flip side of that is when you become the leader, it's sort of the expectation I had for, the people that worked with or for me. And I say that in the book somewhere, surround yourself with good people, give them everything to do, give them all the credit, but you demand loyalty and respect. And, some people don't like that. Like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not going to, I don't have to respect you. I'm not going to demand anything. Well, the model works as you're the person working for the leader, and then it works in leadership. But you reward the people that do that, and you ensure they have career progression.
Yeah, I think if I were to describe in one phrase all the lessons in your book, I would describe them as timeless wisdom. They're things that are always true, just like sustained superior performance is always going to be the bottom line for career advancement, right? Your book contains a bunch of timeless wisdom. It's going to transcend trends. It's going to transcend, society's look at different things. So it's a great book. It's written by a guy in yourself, Mark, that I experienced personally. A superb example of professionalism, a superb servant leader, and somebody who, when I had the yoke of command, that I leaned on greatly. Through some difficult times. There's a story earlier on this podcast called Tango 5. And of course, that was the aircraft mishap that you and I worked through with the squadron. And I cannot tell you how much I leaned on your wisdom and counsel during that time. And I've always been very appreciative of it. So thanks for that.
No, listen, that was a tough time. And, that was one of those times where I'm sitting in my office and, I got this call that we just lost a plane. And, the first thing that comes to mind is, okay, who's there? What's going on? And did we lose any people? And thank God we hadn't. They were very, very lucky. But I think, I had two options at that point. I didn't have to be there. I knew you could completely handle it, as could Brian. But I think those are the things when, you say, okay, wait a minute. I don't have to be there, but is there anything I can do if I'm there? And should a leader show up in time of crisis just to help the person in command? And I think that was the reason. I think I got in the car, got in the plane, and got down there the next day. But I think that's very important. And, I knew it was the place to be, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else during that crisis.
Yeah, especially in times of crisis, right, man? Showing up is 90% of the game. You just be there. You're ready to go. And you were not only there for that incident, but of course for all the stuff that came after it, right? All the investigations and, kind of putting squadron morale right and all that kind of thing. So Mark, the book is Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom and Sea Stories for Leaders by you, Mark C. Fava. I've told everybody out there, you got to get a copy of this. If you're a coaching client of mine, you already have one. But if not, how can people get a copy of this book?
Yeah, look, I'm excited. It was released on Amazon on January 28th and was an instant bestseller in multiple categories. I'm now on my second print, so obviously you can get it from there. It's also in a number of Barnes & Noble stores, but also online at Barnes & Noble. I would just plug those two. And, I've got it in some very, very fine independent bookstores. So it's out there, and you can always get updates from my website, markcfava.com.
Okay. Any more books coming?
Yeah. I'm working on a couple right now. I've got an outline for 3 or 4, but I've got probably the next one will be same type of situation. It will be called Lessons from the Judge. When I worked for a federal judge, it was my first job. After I left the Admiral, it would have been my first job out of law school. Same type of mentor relationship. And that one will be hopefully the same type of stories that apply not only to lawyers, but to anybody that's making some leadership decisions, because they're so inherent to being a leader. It's the same wisdom that you had as a CEO of a major corporation.
Well, we'll be watching for that, and obviously putting out advance feelers when that thing comes out, because I'm sure you'll be able to put in advance orders for it, right?
I hope so. Yeah. I'm gonna. It's been a pretty intense 10 or 11 months of marketing this one. We talked about that a little bit earlier before we got started, and I think the fall is a great season to sort of flip the switch and get back to writing and then focusing on the next one, and then let this one run on autopilot for a while. But I'm still doing a lot of speaking on the book, and I really enjoy doing that, and especially thankful you even helped me get a gig out there in Dallas not too long ago with the Red Cross leadership, which was absolutely wonderful. So thank you.
You bet, man. This is a message that we need to get out there. And Mark, thanks for sharing stories about Lessons from the Admiral, giving us a little teaser about Lessons from the Judge. We'll be watching for that one. And thanks a lot for spending a little time with me this morning, man.
Thanks, TD. You're a brother and a friend.
Thanks for listening in to this episode of No Clichés. For visual stuff like links, text, and pics, visit aboldleader.com and look for the banner at the top of the page. I'd also like to know what you think at aboldleader.com. I'm TD Smyers, and I look forward to having you back.